ain't going back. Not gonna buy into all that. Hey, hey, ain't gonna hide. Gonna let all the fears slide. Got Mother Nature is on my side. Got all of the loving growing inside.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the New Now. I am here once again with Jerry Marzinsky. We're going to continue our chat on the mind monsters. We've already done 1, 2, and 3, and we've been discussing a fifth one after this fourth one, down the road. And I'm going to look at maybe putting Jerry a bit on the hot seat in that I'm going to discuss his personal feelings on the mind monsters. Mind monsters in the everyday, some of his experiences, why he's doing what he's doing, and we're related to perhaps some practical experiences for those of us that aren't in a mental institution or haven't been criminally insane, but still feel the effects of, you could call it low-level schizophrenia, and I'll raise my hand to that. But Jerry, hello, welcome to the show, and what do you think about what I just said?
Well, it's good to be back. I'll just trail behind you. We'll go wherever you want to go.
All right. So we broached this a little bit before we got on, but I know I've seen you do quite a few interviews, and you do, you're 40 years, as you said, retired, and you're still doing the work, as you mentioned to me before. You have a consulting service, and you're still working in private practice. So why do you do it? What's going on? Why are you sharing? Why do you come out? What's your heart have to say about the circumstances behind the mind monsters and your continued efforts?
Well, it took some decades to figure out what these things were. Because when I started out, like everybody else, I believed that the voices were hallucinations. And then piece by piece, once I went to work at the Central State Hospital, which at that time was the biggest psychiatric institution in the world. I mean, it was like a candy store for somebody who loved abnormal psychology like I did. So everything was there. And the most perplexing of the bunch, and the ones that seemed to have the most potential, were the schizophrenics. So at that time, I was working for the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation over here. And we had a psychiatric rehabilitation center there called the Yarborough Center. It was like 4 stories high. And we would scour this giant hospital and bring the patients with the highest potential in to see what we could do with them. So we train them at a job skill, a fairly low-level job skill. There was like janitorial work, there was auto mechanics, there was hairdresser, stuff like that.
So you mean potential for getting out of the hospital and getting
yes.
into, right?
And that was the name of the game, was to get them out of the hospital and off of the state's, budget. And the only thing they knew to do then was to give them these, psychotropic drugs. And they wouldn't stay on them. And number 2 is, as they approached succeeding at any of those courses, the vast majority would do something to sabotage themselves. They just screw it up. They'd stop taking their voices. They get in a fight with the instructor. They get in a fight with somebody in the class. They do something disruptive to get themselves thrown out. And it was like they'd get so close, and then they'd blow it. And I'm like, what is going on here? What is going on? And I couldn't figure it. For years I couldn't figure it. And the more time I spent on the front lines, the more conflicts appeared with what I've been taught in graduate school. I mean, one of the first things I noticed was that the ward that I was in charge of, when the chaplain had a ice cream social in the auditorium, all the patients would go down. Everybody from my ward would go down except the schizophrenics. They'd stay on that dingy ward. I don't know if I talked about that before.
Yeah. No, you mentioned it in the last one. Them being afraid of the Christian Bible.
Yeah.
Kind of perspective.
So that didn't make any sense. So it just went on and on and on until big breaker was, here's the psychiatrist saying the only way to treat these people is with these drugs, and they're treating a chemical imbalance in the patient's brain. I don't know if we went into that, right, or not.
Yep.
So when I saw that they weren't given any tests to measure any kind of chemical imbalance, I'm like, well, how do you know what you're treating? Bottom line is they didn't. They don't have a test. They don't exist.
Right. Well, what made you different? Like there's like, let's say 1,000 psychotherapists and 998 are going along with the program, saying, give them the drugs. Okay. Give them the drugs. Okay. Thank you. Here's my paycheck. I'll see you next week, and go about their lives. What made you the kind of man that went left when everyone else was going right in this sort of a system?
Well, I was curious because, here it was clear to me after some time that somehow the voices were tied into the behavior of the schizophrenic. Somehow, I didn't know how, but there was some kind of correlation there.
Did you have
And
any experiences in your life that brought you to this kind of, like why, like I agree with you. I'm just wondering, and I can talk about my own experience, but what, if anything, happened maybe in your life that brought you to that conclusion? Like
well, there there was a series of circumstances that prepared me for this better than anything else.
right.
And that was my dad, who was very physically and emotionally abusive.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So he was on the verge of psychosis himself.
Right.
You know,
So you grew up around that.
I grew up around it. For me, that was normal. So when I got around the schizophrenics, here they are huffing and puffing and making grunts and scary noises and stuff, and it'd be like, so what else you got? It's like it was like I wasn't scared or intimidated by them.
So you had some experience already.
Well, I didn't know it, but I did. There was nothing that prepared me. I mean, after 4 years of college and 4 years of graduate school, nothing prepared me for dealing with schizophrenics better than living with my dad.
Is that why you went into, the
Yeah.
vocation?
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people go into psychology. They come out of their families with their heads screwed up and spinning and going, what's going on? Who am I? What why am I messed up? And try to figure that out.
Did your father end up on the medications in his life, or he was just?
No, he never did end up on those medications, the ones that he probably would have needed. So it was, for me, it was like normal.
Gotcha.
It's like and even when I was working with the criminally insane in the prison, it would be like, okay, what else you got, buddy? It's but you can't show fear. You just can't show fear. I mean, it's like running from a rabid dog. You got to sit there and kind of tough it out. And I had never heard the voices that I knew of. And here's all the patients telling me about them. So one day I got home from the state hospital, and I'm like, I started praying. I said, Lord, let me hear these things so I know what they sound like, what they're like.
How far into you into your career at this point? Like how many years had you been?
It was probably at least 3 years, at least maybe 4. And here I am hearing here's the patients tell me about them, and some of the stuff they're saying. Well, I was asking to know what they were so I could experience them myself.
And who are you asking? Like just
I was asking God. Okay. I was asking God, let me experience them. What do they sound like? What are they like? Because all the information I had about them was secondhand.
Right.
So about 2 weeks later, I'd come home from the state hospital, and I lived on a lake at that time. And I'd go swimming. I'd wait till the traffic died down around sunset, and then I'd head out into the lake. And I always loved the water. I'm like a fish in water. I'm a certified scuba diver. I've always loved the water. So the water's always been my friend. I've always doing skin diving, scuba diving, always in the water. It was always my friend. And this was in the summer, and the water was kind of bath warm. So I headed out into the lake, and I hit my stride. So I equaled out the amount of oxygen that I could use with my stroke, and just kind of went into a meditative swim. And I was just going and going and going, and it was almost like a swimming meditation. And it was starting to get dark, and I started getting tired. And I stopped and I looked around, and I was like, "Holy cow!" I was far out. It was way far out, and I was too tired to get back. You
Oh,
know, but I didn't worry about that because at Temple University, before you could take scuba diving, you had to take a half a year of skin diving. So they taught us, how to deal with that kind of stuff. It's like they call it like the dead man's float. So what you do is you put your hands behind your back, and your face is down in the water, and then when you run out of air, you whip your head up real fast, you breathe out real fast, and then you start sinking. As soon as you let the air out, you're on your way down,
right.
and then you have to suck in a new breath before your head goes under.
That's skin diving? Is
No,
that
this is what happens when you're too tired to keep swimming.
okay?
So you can do that for all day as long as you
Oh,
don't freeze to death, because it takes minimal energy. All you got to do is put your head up, blow out the air. As soon as you blow out the air, you start sinking, and you're going to go under, because your buoyancy is now neutral.
right.
It's negative. So you have to suck in another breath before your head goes under, and then you drop down about a foot and a half, and then you float back up and fall on your face, and you're laying there with your face in the water, your back up, your hands and your legs just dangling. You're not using any energy whatsoever.
Interesting.
So you're just floating there like a dead man.
Hmm.
And then when you run out of air, you do the same thing again. You whip your head up, blow the air out. You start sinking. You suck the air in again. And then on one of the times that I was going down, what was it? What was it? What triggered it? It was
So you're too far out to get back. So I
yeah,
guess
I was too far out to
you
get
have to
back.
relax or you drown. It sounds like in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, yeah, you can't panic. And so I started sinking, and here's this voice that comes into my head that sounds just like the thousands of thoughts that go through my head on a normal day.
Okay.
There's no change in timbre, no change in tone. It sounds just like one of my regular thoughts, but it said, "You're going to drown," and I'm like, "I'm gonna what?" I'm thinking to myself, it's, that's the last thing on my mind. I wasn't even worried about it,
Hmm.
not at all. But I'm sinking down, and as I'm sinking down, before I start bobbing back up, here comes this voice, and it like I said, it sounded just like my
Hmm.
regular thoughts, but it's not something I would ever say to myself.
Hmm.
Even in touchy situations where I'm running out of air down at the bottom, in scuba diving or something, or I mean, I don't panic. You just don't do that.
Hmm.
So, before I even got up, I went, where the hell did that come from? Because it wasn't me. It wasn't anything that I would have ever thought. Even though I'm out in the lake and it's starting to get dark and I'm sinking down. So I went, okay. Well, the next time, what I did is as I was going down, instead of just holding my breath so I would come bobbing back up to the surface again, I went, okay, I'll show you how I'm going to drown. Then I let out more air, and I started sinking. And then what you hit is they call it the crush depth, where the water pressure is high enough to where it kind of collapses your lungs, and you start sinking faster.
Hmm.
So you're now neutral, negatively buoyant. You're sinking like a rock. So I did that, and I started sinking a little faster than what I was used to. So I was like, that's odd. So I went back up to the surface, and I went, broke the surface, and then here comes that voice again.
Hmm.
See, you're panicking, you're going to drown. And I'm like, where the hell is this coming from? What is this? It wasn't me. So I caught my breath again. And then the next time I went up for air, I sunk down further.
On
Okay.
purpose.
On purpose. I let out more air. I sank fast, and I kept going down. I had to neutralize the pressure in my ears, because the pressure will drive your eardrums in and break them if you don't neutralize it. So I did that a couple of times going down. And then as I was sinking, and by now it's dark. So I'm in the middle of the lake. It's dark. I'm underwater. It's dark. The water's like bath water. It's warm water. And then I feel this something, coming up my legs. It was like cold, it just moving up my legs cold. And I shot to the surface. And even before I got there, I knew what it was. It was a thermocline. It's a layer of cold water that sinks down and usually stays above stays on the floor.
Right.
On the whatever on the so it's heavier than the warm water. It sinks down. I knew what it was before I got to the surface. When I broke surface, here's this thing again saying, look, you're panicking, you're going to drown. And I already knew what it was, but here's this thing again I'm going, what the hell is that? That's not me. What the frick is I wasn't worried about it. I still wasn't worried about it. So I'll show you. I'm going to drown you, whatever you are. So took another breath and sunk down. And I didn't know how far down the bottom was, so I kept sinking. I went through the thermocline. So I feel this layer of cold water just enveloping my whole body, sunk through it. And it was above the floor of the lake, so it was maybe 10 feet above the floor of the lake. I don't know how far down I was. I went down for quite a while, went through the thermocline, and I was surprised that there was warm water below it. And kept sinking. And then all of a sudden I felt this, crawling up my leg, and I'm like, whoa, shot to the surface again.
Cold water crawling up your leg again, you mean?
No, it wasn't the cold water. I'd already went through the thermocline. So it wasn't the cold water. It was something else. And by the time I got to the surface, I realized that's the muck at the bottom of the lake. But I didn't think there was muck at the bottom of the lake because as far out as I went in the years I'd lived there was rocks on the bottom. So I thought the whole lake was just rock bottom. But no, and I could feel it like crawling up my leg as I sunk down into it. So, I got to what it was by the time I got there. And here's this thing comes again. It says, see, you're panicking, you're going to drown. And it says, and there's a motorboat coming in your direction and he can't see you and he's coming right at you. Now, normally you can hear a boat underwater for a long period of time. I didn't hear it, and I might've been, freaked out with trying to figure out what was going on and paying attention to trying to figure out what's going on. And as soon as it said that, I could hear a motorboat in the distance and I could see the little green light, on the thing, and it is coming right toward me. And here's this thing saying, okay, they can't see you and it's heading right for you. It's going to grind you to pieces, and I'm like, I'm not worried about it. I've had to dive down below boats before when I was scuba diving and hung the bottom until they went over. So I said, if I need to, I'll dive down below it and I'll stay there long enough for it to pass over. I wasn't worried about it. It's a little trickier than what I'd like to deal with, but I could deal with it. So I'm watching this thing, and it's this voice keeps telling me, they can't see you. It's coming right for you. It's going to hit you, knock you out, and it's going to grind you to pieces. You're going to just be fish bait. I'm like, screw you, and I watch it and it passes, maybe 5-10 yards in front of me, and I'm watching it pass. Of course, they didn't see me, and I'm following it as it goes by, and it passes by, and then I turn my head, and the wake from the boat hit me right in the face just as I'm taking in a gulp of air. So I suck in a whole mouthful of water. And I start coughing it up, and here it comes again. See, you're coughing, you're going to panic, you're panicking, you're going to drown. And I'm like, screw you. What is this thing? And I thought it just wouldn't let up. It was determined to convince me that I was going to drown. And I'm like, screw you. I'm not going to drown. And so as soon as I cleared my throat out of all that water, I went down again. And I went down and I stuck my feet stuck in the mud, and it was like oozy mud. And then my body kind of went over, and my arms were hanging in front of me about 3 or 4 inches above the muck on the bottom. And there was no sight. There was no sound. I was kind of a little bit afraid because I didn't know what the hell was going on. So my attention was like waiting for something to grab me. And by now it's like 10:30, 11 at night. There was no light, and I'm down at the bottom of the lake like a lunatic, stuck in the mud, laying there as if I were dead. I mean, if I were dead, that's what I would have looked like.
Hmm.
And the water was bath warm, so I wasn't feeling anything. So there
Hmm.
was no sound, there was no sight, there was no sensation. It was like all my senses were turned off,
Hmm.
and all that there was the awareness that I'm aware that I'm aware. And it was like a peak moment. It was like that's what's there beyond all the senses and
Hmm.
all the thoughts or anything else. It's just your spirit, just you. And there is no noise because the senses are always bombarding you with all kinds of stuff there. So it was like a peak moment. It was like a revelation. That's what's there beyond all the noise coming in all the
Hmm.
time. That's what the spirit sounds like. And I had my my experience of what the voices sounded like, and it freaked me out that they sounded just like my regular thoughts. So I realized at that point how hard it is for the schizophrenics to tell the difference between their thoughts and these thoughts of the voices. Because they want it to make it look like, and we're taught from the time we're born that any thought that you have in your head belongs to you.
So you were like, it seems like you had your own near-death experience almost there.
Uh,
Well, I mean,
Well, I wasn't anywhere near death.
well, what happened after you were floating at the muck at the bottom? Like,
Oh, I stayed there just kind of in awe that everything was turned off. And I probably had another 15, 20 seconds of air, but that was long enough to experience that
mm,
before because I was just holding my breath,
right.
so I was about out of breath. And when I ran out of breath, I just slowly swam to the surface and came up, and that voice was gone. That thing was gone. It
Really?
didn't come back, and it never came back again. And then what was so strange is about 3 weeks later, somebody drowned in the lake at about that same spot.
Interesting.
So I found that odd. Um,
So afterwards, you came back and you had kind of this revelation on the so-called patients you were working with.
right. And so that's what makes it so hard for schizophrenics to figure out, what's their thoughts and what's the voice's thoughts. And now Manuel Swedenborg, the Christian mystic, says none of your thoughts are your own. They either come from the dark side or they come from the good side. But now was the issue of how do you get across to the schizophrenic what are their thoughts and what are what are what are the voices, because if they
Mm,
sound just like their regular thoughts, and the voices don't want them to be able to distinguish between their regular thoughts and the voices, because what they want to do is take over the individual by making them think that those are their own thoughts.
hmm
you know but so eventually what came clear is, and this came from Sherry Sweeney, who recovered fully on her own without drugs also, decades ago. She said any negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from the dark side. And the third way to identify them is by their intent. Their intent or their intention is not the same as for you, is not the same as your intention for yourself.
What's the first way? So second way was negative. Third way is their intention. What
Well,
was the first way?
they're consistently negative. The uh, which is one of the first things I noticed. They're consistently negative. They're not random like hallucinations. I mean, hallucination, I've dealt with them, throughout my experience. The last 10 years I spent working in hospital ERs doing psych crisis. Hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. You know,
Psych crisis. Interesting.
yeah. Oh
You,
yeah. When the cops would drag in, people who were totally psychotic into the ER and dump them off, somebody had to deal with them, and the doctors don't know what to deal with them.
cool.
They don't respond to any of their treatments.
Wow. Interesting job description.
Yeah, it wasn't boring. Yeah.
So
That's
negative thoughts, harmful, and so you said three things. Negative thoughts, let's say Sherry Sweeney, who I've talked with a few times as well, So they're trying to do you harm. They're negative. And what was the first way again?
Well, they're consistently negative was the
Okay.
I had a listing here somewhere. God darn it. Oh, here it is. Okay. So the quickest way to identify them is they're consistently negative. They're telling you bad stuff about yourself and everybody else around you. They want you to be isolated with just them and nobody else. They want to cut you off from your wife, your family, your girlfriend. They want you in your room staring at the ceiling, listening to their bullcrap all day. That's what they want. So any negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from them. Okay. And then the third way is their intention for you is not your intention for yourself. Their intention for you is always bad. It's to get you in trouble. So, the first thing I noticed is the schizophrenics were telling me that these voices are always telling them bad stuff. And hallucinations don't do that. The first question I had was, what holds them on such a negative, consistently negative trajectory? Hallucinations are all over the place. They're positive, they're negative, they're neutral, they're just all over the place. These things are consistently negative. What force holds them on that track?
So you dealt with, I guess, authentic hallucinations when you were doing your psych emergency or your.
Oh yeah. They're not the same. they're not the same. Of course, we had to get a medical clearance. If somebody was, because there are medical things that can cause hallucinations, but they don't follow these patterns.
Right.
Okay. So one of the first things I was curious about is nobody. I mean, there were thousands of staff, probably thousands of staff at that hospital that sprawled over 200. There were 200 buildings, and it sprawled over like 3,000 acres. It was huge. It was the size of a city. And it was full of crazy people. All kinds. Everybody. And none of them were interested in what the voices were saying. None of them, just me. So I started asking the patients, what are they telling you? What are they saying? What are you hearing? And they were all consistently negative things.
This was around the time when you had your swimming experience, like the same time.
Oh, it was well before that. I started asking them what the voices were saying probably after the first year, when I realized that what psychiatry and what the educational establishment had taught me was bullcrap. There was no chemical imbalance. They have no test for a chemical imbalance. They have no test for any of those 300 diagnoses they made up. They make them up. It's like a tobacco barn out here. They sit in there, somebody comes in and goes, "Hey, I got a new diagnosis. It's these are the features." And they all vote on it. They vote them in, they vote them out. I think they had Southern Bell syndrome in there. They voted in one time and they got so much flack from that. I think they took it out. Mental retardation was a psychiatric disorder at a point. Mental retardation was another one. So, if they're unpopular, they vote them out. They just need a diagnosis and a number to get money from the insurance companies.
Of course. Yeah.
So they make these things up, and then the friggin' pharmaceutical industry comes over behind them and goes, "Oh yeah, we got a drug for this," and they make up some toxic bull crap that they sell on television with all the money they're making from all the other toxic crap they're selling.
For sure. Yeah.
The other thing I noticed with them is that the voices were consistently anti-religious. I started asking the patients in the at the hospital, I go, "Well, what happens when you go to church?" And it broke down into 3 categories. If the voices were not very strong, they would shut up when they went into a church. If they were moderate, they would kick up and they'd start badgering the person. Tell them, "Oh, the preacher's full of crap. He doesn't know what he's doing. That this is a bunch of garbage. Why are you even wasting your time in here?" That kind of stuff. So they would interfere with them listening to the preacher. If they were very strong, they would actually drive them up. These people would get up and run out of the church. So it broke down into 3 categories. Then you go, well, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? And consistently. So if you got these consistent factors like that, they can't be hallucinations. There's something else causing them. Hallucinations are random. They foster and create negative emotion. That's what they're after. They want to get you upset. They want to get you angry. They want to get you paranoid. Because it turned out. Now it took me, I don't know, probably 20 years to figure this out, but they are energetic parasites. After they attack the patient, and I learned this at the state hospital too. And even though the patient might be laying in bed all night, just tossing and turning, in the morning when they get up, they say they feel so tired as if they were working out in the hot sun with a pickaxe all day, digging ditches. That's and all they were doing was laying in bed, tossing and turning. They weren't physically using that energy. So I figured, well, if you're being badgered all day and all night by negative voices telling you you're a piece of crap and you're stupid and you're ugly and nobody loves you and you're worthless and you should kill yourself. I mean, if that's going on all day, I mean, I guess that would wear you down, I would think. So I just assumed that was the case. And then I was well out of the, see, at the state hospital, there was an unwritten law that you don't do anything intentionally to upset schizophrenics because they're unstable. You don't know what they're going to do when they get upset. If you piss them off, you could get your clock cleaned. So, and the psychiatrists were constantly getting beat up. I'm like, what's going on? These state psychiatrists, of course, a lot of them came from Cuba. The state hospital at that time was in the middle of nowhere. It was in the middle of central Georgia. It was 30-mile drive to get to the nearest city where you could go to a McDonald's and get a hamburger.
Why Cuba?
They were psychiatrists who came over from Cuba.
How come?
So they escaped Cuba. They
escaped
the communists in Cuba.
Right. Oh, okay.
So they got those, and then they had psychiatrists who couldn't find jobs anywhere else. So they weren't the cream of the crop by a long shot. And they had caseloads of 700. There was one psychiatrist for an entire psychiatric unit with maybe 700-800 people in it.
Was it a well-paying job, if you don't mind my asking?
Well, for state jobs, it was.
Yeah. Okay.
It wasn't as good as working for working private. But these guys were always getting punched out by schizophrenics. And they would spend like 20 minutes a month with them at the most.
Really?
And back in those days, there wasn't any cell phones. This was back in the 70s. What we had was the dial-up phones and the push-button phones. That was the state of the technology. So the way word spread was that they called it the hospital food factory. So there was this big food factory that prepared food for the entire hospital.
Right.
And they had a staff dining room there. And, I was young. We were all young most of us were just graduated from, graduate school. And, I mean, even though the food was full of starch, we didn't care. We burned it off. So it was like 75 cents for a meal. And, some of the stuff was like, we called it mystery meat. We had no idea what it was, and then they had bug juice. But being young, we didn't care about the diet. We'd eat there. And that's where everybody met, from all over the hospital. We'd all come at lunchtime and we'd talk to one another from all the different units. The only unit that didn't have any staff there was the building for the criminally insane. And for me, that was always a mystery. I'd pass by it all the time and I'd go, I wonder what's in there. Because we could get into any other unit in the hospital. Any of those other buildings we could get into with the passes badges we had. We could not get into that one. Oh. They would not allow anybody who didn't work there into that building. So I went, well, these people must be dangerous. Little did I know that, come 25, 30 years later, I'd be working with those people. I'd be right in there with them. And the only thing I knew at that time is they had, the word got out that they got an airline pilot who was delusional and thought that his wife was turning their son into a homosexual. So he murdered his wife and ended up in there. And he was flying jets. So I was like, No, I never did meet him.
Oh,
I never could get in there. No, nobody could get in there.
oh, I see. So at the time you heard he was in that
Yeah,
criminally
that
insane,
was like,
right?
yeah, that was like, that came out in the rumor mill.
Did you want to get
Uh,
in there? Like
oh
they were
yeah,
saying,
yeah. I
yeah.
wanted to see what was in there. You
Like,
bet I wanted to see what was in there. I every chance I got, I would go to different units in the hospital to see what was in there. I remember going into one unit where they were really severely, profoundly either psychotic or mentally retarded. And one girl I was dating worked in there. She got me in one day, and what happened was one lady bit the ear off another lady, and in the morning the nurse came in, and the ear was sitting on her desk, and they couldn't reattach it. So it was in a shoebox. The nurse put it in a shoebox on the desk, and she was wondering what to do with it. And all the patients were like, "Oh, we got to give it a funeral. We got to give it a funeral." so, so they took him out there, and here's half the ward out in the front yard of that particular unit. They dug a hole and they buried the ear and gave it a funeral. So there were some bizarre things that happened in that place. Um,
interesting.
so where was I? I went the negative stuff. Um,
So what was the difference between a regular doctor and a doctor working in the criminally insane? Like did
Oh, they were the same. They were psychiatrists. The same thing. They go there. They had these guys all full of drugs. I mean, a lot of them. The name of the game was control.
the
You know,
psychiatrists or the patients in the criminally insane?
well, it was the psychiatrists were controlling the patients with these major tranquilizers.
Right.
You know, and these things back then they were given major doses. I mean, and they would keep them on them for years. And they had something called the Thorazine shuffle, where these guys could not walk with a normal gait anymore. They would drag their feet and kind of shuffle. It was permanent neurological damage. Never went back due to these psychiatric drugs. And these are doing the same thing today. And never did I see a psychiatrist tell any of those patients what these drugs could do to them.
Hmm.
They'd say, "Oh yeah, your mouth might get a little dry, your vision will get blurred, yeah, that you'll get used to it." They wouldn't tell them how these are some of the most dangerous drugs in use in medicine today.
So you figured that out like back when you were like the story you were describing with the ear around that time. You
Well,
were
I
you were
I, I
watching
knew,
this.
yeah, I was watching it in real time, so I knew with long-term use they were bad.
Right.
But I didn't know how long that use had to be before people would revert into zombie status.
How long did you work in that particular hospital, if you don't mind?
7 years.
So from the ear experience on, you stayed a few more years.
Yeah, I stayed 7 years, and then I went back to a PhD program, which was piled higher and deeper. They didn't know anything. I probably would have done a lot better had I not spent those 7 years at the state hospital and then went back into that bull crap,
Right.
because they didn't know anything. They really didn't know anything. And I'm like, what am I doing here? And I started getting more and more depressed, and like finally I just couldn't deal with it anymore. Um,
So
so
you
by
went.
then I'd already had my master's degree. I got through 2 years before I just couldn't take it anymore. It was like,
Oh,
this is just bull.
so you went back to get your PhD after that to kind of study some more on the topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Because I kept thinking in the back of my head is, I went through 4 years of psychology looking for answers,
Right.
and they didn't have any.
Mm.
Now they had some with experimental psychology and behavior type stuff. I mean, that worked, but I was looking for more than that.
Gotcha.
So I got out of the I left 4 years of psychology from Temple University, and it was like there were no answers.
Mm.
Nothing I was looking for. So I was going, well, maybe they're hiding the answers in the master's programs. So I got in there, 2 years master's. No answers there. But there was some stuff like Rogers stuff, active listening, that kind of stuff, but nothing that I was looking for. And then 2 years in that PhD program, and they knew nothing. They knew nothing, and they acted like it. And then if you question them, they got all arrogant and puffy, like, no, you don't question us. How dare you question us? You do what we say.
Mm.
And I thought, this is bull crap. So I couldn't deal with it. Um, but at the state hospital, like I said, there was this unwritten law that you don't upset schizophrenics because the psychiatrists were getting pounded.
Did you ever have your clock clean, so to speak?
No,
No.
no, I never did. I came close once working in a private state hospital, but that was my fault because I had this cute little medical intern with me, and I'm going, well, let's see if I can show her what some of these guys are capable of without pushing them over.
Hmm.
So I made the mistake of doing that with a psychotic alcoholic Apache who had been brought down from the Indian reservation up north. And that guy went off like a like a powder keg. He picked up a friggin', living room chair and he threw it at me across the room, and it skimmed the top of my head and
Really?
bounced off the wall. It just skimmed the top of my head.
Wow.
So that's the closest I ever came. Now, a lot of my colleagues got hurt, one way or the other.
So this was after you came out of, attempting the masters, and then you went into.
But yeah, at the state hospital, I got in trouble for asking schizophrenics questions about what the voices were saying.
Right.
So what had happened is the voices didn't like that. So the guy wouldn't tell me that, but they went to the psychiatrist and they said, "Hey, this guy's asking me questions about the voices, and I don't like it." So I got hauled up in front of the psychiatrist, and they were saying, "You will not ask them questions about voices. They are hallucinations, and what you're doing is you're reinforcing their hallucinations by acting as if they're real and giving them the time of day."
Well, what was your supposed job then? If they had psychiatrists in the hospital, what were you supposed to be doing with the patients?
Well, what was I guess one of my main jobs was being a spy for psychiatry, keeping an eye on these guys, seeing who was on their medications, who was off,
Right.
seeing how they were doing in their classes, seeing if they were starting to lose it, counseling with them, working with them, making sure they didn't do anything stupid. Making sure they were staying in their classes and they were behaving themselves, and then getting them a placement if they ever made it that far.
Hmm.
So our job was to get them out of the hospital.
Gotcha.
But they wouldn't stay on those medications. They always went off the medications at some point. It didn't matter when, and that was perplexing to me too. It's like, why are they choosing to go psychotic? That's what it looked like. You go off your meds, and they've done it a million times before. They know what happened when they go off their meds. They completely lose it. They get crazy. They go psychotic. And I'm like, why are they doing that? Why are they choosing to go crazy? Why is that happening? So again, I started asking them, but I had to be real low key because I got in trouble twice, once with the medical director and once with a regular psychiatrist on the ward for asking them questions about the voices.
Mm.
You weren't allowed to do that. And if you upset them, that was another thing. It was like, you should know better than to upset them, and I really wasn't free to really research until I got to the prison. Once I was working with the criminally insane in the prison, if one of the prisoners went to the prison psychiatrist or the warden or any of the prison staff and said, "Oh, that psych guy's asking me questions about the voices and it's upsetting me," they would go, "Get out of my face, man. What do you get out of? Get out of my face."
So
please.
after the private, you went back into the, I guess the public, the criminally insane, and you got to do more research.
Yeah. So I was able to, that place was set up for violence. If they went off, that place was set off to deal with it. That's what they did. So a patient I was working with who went to a warden or a psychiatrist and said, "Oh, he's asking me questions about my voices," they'd go, "Get out of my face. So what?" It wasn't an issue. Where at the state hospital, it was. It was a big issue. You don't do that. That's against the rules.
Right. So you were at a private hospital when you were talking with them about, or was this?
It was a state hospital.
So you could ask the questions at the second.
Well, where I was I was working for the medical department under psychology, the psychology department at the state prison.
Oh, I got you. So you're in the prison. Okay.
I was working at the state prison with the criminally insane.
Okay, and there they didn't mind you asking whatever you needed to ask.
No, it was not an issue until they started recovering. then it became an issue, which shocked the hell out of me.
Interesting.
I couldn't believe it. But what was happening? Let me see, where was I before I lost my train of thought there? Toward the end of the 7 years, there was, I don't know if I talked about this last time or not. There was one girl who went off her meds for that's where I was. Why are they going off their meds? Why are they choosing to go psychotic? So, I'd ask the psych nurses, I'd ask the psychiatrist. The most prevalent answer from both the patients and the psychiatrists were that they didn't like the side effects of the medications.
So
they were awful.
One girl, you say?
Oh yeah, that was later. So when I started asking the questions, why, I asked both the staff and the patients, why are they going off their meds? This was back at the state hospital. Everyone that went off their meds and got in trouble, I bring them into my office. Why'd you do it? Why'd you do that? You know what happens when you went off your meds. Why'd you do it? Do you want to go nuts? No. Well, why'd you do it? Well, the side effects. And that was the most prevalent explanation from both staff and the schizophrenics. The side effects of the meds were horrible, and they were absolutely awful. But when you look at what it's like to be psychotic, it's like hell on earth. When I look at what it was like and watch what they go through when they're floridly psychotic, it's much, much worse than dealing with the side effects of those medications, even though those side effects really suck.
But they didn't think so, though, the patients themselves, for whatever reason.
Well, you know what? I didn't know. So I started asking them. What I did is I got everyone that went off the meds on my caseload, I'd bring them in, and I'd give them a sheet of paper, and I'd said, why'd you go off your meds? Oh, the side effects. That was the standard answer. Side effects suck. I don't want to deal with them. They made me feel my blurred vision, sexual dysfunction. I felt like a zombie. I was drooling. I mean, just this, pages long of bad side effects from that stuff. And they didn't all have the same ones. So I'd give them a blank sheet of paper and I'd say, write down all the side effects that you had from your meds. So they'd write them down. There'd be 5 or 6 of them. And then I went through the DSM and wrote down a check sheet of all the negative symptoms of florid psychosis. And they were awful. And I'd give them and I said, check each one of these symptoms you experienced when you were psychotic. And it would do bam, 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 bunches of them. It was a horror show. And then when they were done that, I'd give them both sheets back and I said, which one is worse? Consistently, 100%. Being psychotic was worse. They all said it. There wasn't one of them that said, no, the medicines were worse than the psychosis. Not one. They all agreed that the psychotic symptoms were much worse than the side effects from the medications. So I said, well, then why did you go off your meds? You know what their answer was? And this was for years. This was for 3 freaking years. I don't know. Time after time after time. Scores of them. None of them knew.
No one, not even one, gave you an answer.
Nope. And I felt like a crazy guy myself, beating my head against the wall because I asked every single one of them, why'd you go off your meds? None of them knew. They couldn't answer that question. They had no idea.
Why do you think they went off their meds?
I didn't know. I didn't know. It wasn't because, if they're all saying that the side effects of the meds aren't anywhere near as bad as the psychosis, then why are they doing it? Didn't make any sense to me. So I just kept asking the same question. 3 years straight, I was asking that question until it was like the last 3 years I was at the state hospital. I would ask every single one of them that question. I felt like a crazy guy myself. You keep doing the same thing. You keep going the same answer. It's like beating your head against the wall. But if they didn't know, who did? Nobody else knew. I didn't know. Psychiatry didn't know. Nurses didn't. Nobody knew. If they didn't have the answer to that, who would have it? Nobody. So one day, one gal, she was doing good in cosmetology class. She was making good grades. She was about to graduate. She was doing real good. She was coming up on finishing her classwork, and she goes off her meds. and she goes berserk and she starts, raising hell in the classroom. And so here's the cosmetology teacher calls me up. She said, "You need to get down here. Jane Doe is in the corner talking to the voices and screaming at
Was
people."
it a cosmetology course in prison, or was just a
No,
private?
it was at the state hospital.
So they were trying to teach people to get back
Yeah, they
into
were teaching.
society, so
Right,
to speak. Right.
right.
Okay.
So I bring her out of there. She was off her meds. She'd been off her meds for about 2 weeks, maybe more. Didn't tell anybody. She was putting them under her cheek and then spitting them out later. So they put her back on her meds, and that was the third time she'd done it. And we kind of had an unwritten rule on our floor: if they go off their meds 3 times, they're not going to stay on their meds if they're released. So cut them off of classes and try somebody new who will stay on the meds. So we were about to discharge her, and I notified her mother, and her mother calls me from South Georgia and says, "Please don't do that. I can't deal with her. I've dealt with her for years. I can't handle her. I'll come up there and we'll talk to her. We'll find out why she went off her meds. Please don't discharge her." So she was begging me, and I felt sorry for her because I know what she went through. And she said, "I'll come up. I'll come up this Friday." So she came up Friday afternoon. Came up to my office. We brought the patient in, and her and her mother are sitting there, and her mother and I are telling her, begging her, "Why did you do it? This is the third time. Why did you go off your meds? Please tell us." And she just wouldn't talk. And then finally she said, "You won't believe me." And I said, "I've heard some pretty weird stuff since I've been here. You know, Try me." And she said, "The voices told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me. And they told me the side effects of the meds were the effects of the poison." And that's in effect what was actually happening. Those meds are poison. They're toxic. They're some of the most toxic drugs used in medicine today. So the psychiatrist was in effect poisoning her, and the voices were saying, "Yeah, he's poisoning you, and the side effects of the medications are due to him poisoning you. So stop taking those things." As soon as she said that, in my mind, click. That's why all the psychiatrists are getting the crap kicked out of them.
Of course.
It just clicked. It was like, that's why it's happening. And even though it might not be in a direct voice, like, "Hey, he's poisoning you." It's like, yeah, these drugs are poison. These drugs, look what they're doing to you. Dry mouth, watery eyes. You can't see straight. You can't talk straight. Your tongue stick. Sexual dysfunction. Your brain is like drugged up, and you're like a zombie. I mean, it's awful stuff. It's awful stuff. So it was like that clicked into place. Okay, the voices are telling them not to take the meds. So that was the greatest, the profound discovery I had there, before I left the state hospital. But by then I was sick of working with them. It was like, they still weren't recovering. They still weren't recovering. Although I was learning more and more and more about them, I still didn't know enough to affect what was going on. Still the only way to treat them was with these toxic medications. So then there was 2 years of the PhD program where I learned virtually nothing useful clinically. And, they wanted you to memorize this whole entire DSM thing almost, that these psychiatrists just made up in their tobacco barn auction.
So the DSM was the book of different so-called problems.
Different psychiatric diagnoses. It started out with, I don't know, what was it, a handful, and then went up to like 25, and then it went up to 100, and then it went up to 200, and I think right now it's like about 335 or something like that in the DSM-5 or whatever. And they just keep inventing these things and putting them in there. And then the drug companies come behind and make up some kind of toxic drug to give you to treat whatever they dreamt up. I mean, it's the biggest scam in the face of the planet. Unbelievable what they're doing. So when I got to the prison, here they came again.
This is
after the PhD program.
Right.
I was out. It was like, okay, what do I do now? Where am I going to go? And I was reading Arizona Highways magazine. So they had all these cool looking places in Arizona. I said, that's where I want to go. So I took off. I went to Arizona, and found a job working in the emergency room of the county hospital doing psych crisis there. And worked there for, maybe a year. That was brutal because in the morning you had to answer to like 5 different psychiatrists. If you admitted somebody during the night, you better have a good reason because they were going to beat you up. And I watched clinicians just be driven crazy by them. Just they go, I can't deal with this anymore. But the state hospital taught me a few things, and I didn't have any problems with them. I didn't have any problem standing up to them too either. So after a year of that, I found a job at the biggest mental health center in Tucson, and worked there for 2 years. And then a friend of mine who was working in the state prison here said they have a psychology department at the state prison, and the boss there is really good. Why don't you apply? So they talked me into it. And I did. And for the first 10 years, it was great. It was like a mom and pop operation, but the more it went, the worse it got. So I started asking questions there. And what I did is eventually I would pick schizophrenics on the units I was assigned to that were willing to tell me what the voices were telling them in real time. So I made a deal with them. I'll do everything I can to help you. They knew I knew more about the voices than anybody else they'd ever dealt with. And it still wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to do anything with them.
So this was during your 10 years there. You kind of, I guess, gained a
10
reputation.
years in the ER after that. So there was like 18 years at the state prison working in the psych department. And then another 10 years after that working in hospital emergency rooms. So after I retired from the state prison, then I went and worked in hospital emergency rooms doing psych crisis. But this is a period of time I was working at the state prison in the psychology department there. So here I was surrounded by, psychotic schizophrenics again. And I'm like, oh my God, here it comes again. It was like I tried to escape to go to graduate school, get away from these guys, because they were driving me nuts. It's like, what's doing this? What's doing this? And I kept drawing blanks. I get an answer here, an answer there, an answer here, piece by piece, just these little fragments of what was going on. It was like this giant puzzle. And I had a bunch of the little pieces, but I didn't have enough of the puzzle to see clearly what was going on. But when I got a piece, I'd go, okay, this is a piece. I don't know where it goes, but this is a piece, and I'd hang on to it. And as I got more information from these guys, I get piece by piece by piece. And what I did is I would tell them straight up. I'd say, this is what I know. This is what I know about the voices. And basically, what else can you teach me? And they would see that I knew more than anybody else that they'd ever dealt with, and that I was trying to learn. I was trying to figure it out. I wasn't just blowing them off and saying, yeah, they're hallucinations, take your medicines and go away. I was actually trying to figure out what these were, what they were saying, how they operated, what they were. And the prison was a perfect place to do that. So I had an agreement with them. I chose the ones who were willing to tell me what the voices were saying, and made an agreement, said, I will help you as much as I can. I'll do whatever I can for you. This is what I want in return.
How many agreed to your terms?
Oh, I usually had 10 to 13, and a lot of them didn't want to do it. They didn't, the voices are telling them not to tell anybody, what they're saying. So that's one of the things the voices tell them all. Don't tell anybody. They'll lock you up. They'll give you more medicine. They're and it got a little hairy at times there, because you'd have, one of the guys who's, he kind of unstable. He should have been taking probably more meds, but he lied to the psychiatrist and said the voices weren't as bad as they really were. And I remember one come in one day and he's saying, "Hey, one of the guards in the unit really disrespected me. The voices are telling me to stab him in the gut." And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, So it was like a catch-22. If I turned him into security and had him locked up for just saying that would spread to all the rest of them I was working with, and none of them would tell me anything. That'd be it. I'd be banned. On the other hand, if he actually did stab a guard and they found out about it, I'd be in big trouble. If he said, "Well, yeah, I stabbed the guard, but I told I told Marzinsky and he didn't do anything about it," that'd be it. I'd be gone. Probably facing charges on top of it. So what I did, that guy had an appointment every day. I wanted to see him every day. He'd come in, I'd keep real tight watch on him until I was sure that, he was just talking and he wasn't going to do anything. So you had situations like that come up from time to time. But, for the most part, I didn't have to do anything like that, because they would tell me and we'd deal with it before it got to that point. Matter of fact, I think we probably headed off several assaults that would have happened otherwise, So yeah, the whole time I'm getting more and more information. And, did I tell you about the one guy with the pot fields?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that was one of the stories. And that was after this guy fully recovered. The voices were gone. By then I had enough, I knew enough to get rid of them. But prior to that, I was going, there was a 1-to-1 correlation between the voices attacking these people and their energy levels dropping down to nothing, despite the fact that all they were doing was lying in bed. They weren't using that energy. And I'd ask them, well, how'd you feel after the voices attacked you? It was like a 1-to-1. Every single one said, after the voices attack, I feel drained. I'm energy. I don't have any energy left at all. And like I was telling you, I thought it was just them dragging, blah, 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 you're no good, you're rotten, you're ugly, you're stupid. If you're hearing that all day, I figured that would do it. That was my assumption. Then one day I was in the prison and I was under some of the worst units out there. And I was an adrenaline junkie, so I didn't really mind that much. So they put me under one unit, and they also gave me the jail for the prison to cover also. So this is where the worst of the worst went. From all over the prison, it was the jail for the entire prison, and they'd lock them up there. There were 2 people in a small cell, 8 by 10, maybe, built for one person. They were sticking 2 people in there. And I came to work one day, and here's this inmate letter on my desk from one of the inmates in the Central Detention Unit, CDU, that jail. And it's saying, my roommate's, my cellmate's crazy as a bug. He paces the cell. He's talking to voices all throughout the night. All night. He's pacing the cell. He's acting weird. He was standing there at 3 a.m, just staring at me. I can't deal with this anymore. So I look him up, find out why he's in there, why they put him in there. And it turned out what he did is he snitched off the Aryan Brotherhood, which is one of the big gangs in the prison. He snitched off one of their drug deals, and they wanted him dead because they broke up the gang on that prison unit, and they shipped those guys all over the state. So they effectively destroyed that gang on that unit, and they took all their drugs. That it takes a long time to smuggle drugs into the prison. I mean, it's not easy. So they were pissed. They wanted this guy dead. They'd already stabbed him once. So he was there for protective custody, and you couldn't be under much more stress than him unless you were on a combat mission in the war on the front lines. Here he is, the gangster sticking notes under his door saying, we're going to kill you. As soon as you walk out of there, as soon as we get our hands on you, we're going to kill you. They actually got in trouble on purpose to get thrown into jail so they would have a chance to kill this guy. That's how pissed they were at this guy. And they would throw these notes under his door saying, you're done. You're done. As soon as we catch you, you're done. We're out here. We're waiting for you. You're done. So he has that going on, with these guys constantly doing that to him. And then he has this lunatic in there, pacing around, talking to voices, staring at him at 3 a.m, just looking at him, no telling what he's going to do. He's off meds. He's floridly psychotic. You couldn't be under much more stress than that.
Why was this Aryan guy in jail? Do you know? Originally.
Well, the Aryan guy wasn't in jail. The Aryan guy, what they did is they got in trouble on purpose.
No. I mean, the guy that they wanted to kill. Why was he in jail? The guy that snitched them out. Do you know why?
he was in, I don't know why he was in jail in the first place, but he was in there for protective custody.
Right.
To me, it didn't matter why he was there in the first place. I needed to deal with what was going on right then. And for the most part, I didn't look up why they were in prison,
Okay.
unless I absolutely had to, because what I found is some of them did some stuff that was just so disgusting that it really tainted my
Mm.
view of working with them. I
Mm.
didn't want, especially the ones I was working with closely, unless I had to look it up, I did. So I don't know why the guy that they stabbed, who snitched him off. I don't know why he was in there.
Okay.
The other guy, I don't know why he was there either. But he was in the jail because he was psychotic as a bedbug, and they couldn't control him wherever he was. And then the other guys, they went there on purpose. So I pulled the first guy out, the guy who the gangsters had already stabbed once, and had written me the letter, said, "Come and get me out of here. I can't stand this anymore." And I was watching him as he came up the steps up to the control room where the interview room was. And he just bounded up the steps. I mean, he had plenty of energy. He didn't use the guardrail. He just boom, 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 right up. He had a brisk, pace. He walked into the office. He sat down. He wasn't, groggy or his verbiage was good. It was coherent. I mean, he was just upset. He was anxious. And he was, well, this happened and this happened and that, and you got to help me. I can't deal with this. I can't stand this. And I said, well, okay, I'll do what I can. I don't have a lot of power here, but I'll do what I can. So I watched him go back, and he had plenty of energy. Then I watched as the psychotic guy in that same cell comes out. Now, this was in a perfect experimental situation. They were in the same cell, eating the same food with the same guards in the same environment.
Mm.
Everything was equalized. There wasn't anything that could interfere. They were both under the same situation. So there wasn't any better experimental situation than that was naturally occurring. So I pull up the psychotic guy, and he just barely makes it up the steps. I mean, he's just dragging himself up the steps, hanging onto the guardrail. He shuffles across the floor. He sits down, and he's like, like this. You're hearing voices. Yeah, I'm hearing voices. There's a bunch of them. I'm hearing them. And they're driving me crazy. And I don't. You on meds? No, I'm not on meds. Well, I think we probably ought to put you on some. And I watch him go back down. He's got no energy. He's drained. And after I saw that, I'm sitting there and I'm going, it's not what the voices are telling these guys. There's something else going on. There's the voices are taking their energy somehow. I don't know how they're doing it, but they're doing it. So it was then when I discovered that they were energetic parasites. They were actually taking the energy from these people. And I started asking them, does this happen one after another when it went up into the hundreds? Do you feel worse after the voices attack you? Do you have less energy? Do you feel like you're drained? Yeah. Well, did you use that energy? No, I didn't use it. Well, then where did it go? Well, I don't know. They didn't even think about it. They didn't even think about it. It didn't even cross their mind. It's like the voices didn't want them to know that. And they did kick up when I started asking them those questions too. The voices didn't like me asking them questions about that, So it went on and on. And, as I was asking them questions about, the voices, I would give them exercises. I said, well, try this and come back in a week and tell me what happened.
What sort of exercises?
Oh, it was like, try this. Anything that I thought would interfere with the voices. Especially stuff that they said the voices didn't like. If the voices said they didn't like them doing something, I'd say give them a double dose of it.
Mm.
Other stuff like the 23rd Psalm. I learned at the state hospital. The patients at the state hospital were telling me when they repeated the 23rd Psalm. Now, I'm not a religious fanatic by a long shot, but they tell me when they repeat the 23rd Psalm, the voices would act like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. And I'm going, why would a hallucination do that? So here's all these things, these patterns that these things are running, that hallucinations don't run patterns. And yet the psychiatric mafia is saying, oh yeah, they're hallucinations, just forget it, take your meds, shut up, get away. We'll see you next month, take your meds. Just, they never asked them any questions. They never spent any time with them. And even in private practice, I mean, even in the private hospitals, they didn't spend any time with them. Oh, how's your meds doing? And if they told them, well, the voices are getting worse, then they give them more. So the patients are constantly lying to the psychiatrist about what their symptoms are because they didn't want to take more of those medicines. So
knowing all this, how do you help your patients? Like, you're still dealing with people, you're still chatting with them, the badness, we'll say, pardon my English, of the medicines.
Well, one of the first things that we dealt with is what we were talking about earlier, is how do you tell the difference between your thoughts and the voices?
So you're teaching them that when you talk to them.
You have to teach them that. And then you have to teach them the patterns. Okay. So like the negativity, the anti-religious, the fostering negative emotion.
Right.
And the reason they foster negative emotion and tell them all that bull crap, you're ugly, you're stupid, kill yourself kind of stuff, is because they want to generate negative emotional energy.
Right.
If they don't have that, they only can take the negative emotional energy. If the person's feeling good, they can't, they feed off of that negative emotional energy.
Right.
So after they get done beating on them and they turn their head to mush and this negative firestorm going on in their heads, then they suck out the energy and these guys are drained. They're just drained. So they do to the schizophrenics what we do to cows, what the dairy farmer does to cows. They put them out in the pasture to eat grass, and they eat grass, they make milk, they bring them back in, they isolate them, then they milk them, and they put them back out to pasture again. That's what these voices are doing to the schizophrenics. They're doing the same things. They're feeding off them over and over and over again.
I might say they're doing it to everyone in one form or another.
Well, they do. They do. Every once in a while, everybody's had it, where they're walking around minding their own business, and all of a sudden this horrible thought barges into their head. Stab this guy, or push this guy off a cliff, or jump off the bridge, or drive your car into oncoming traffic. That's not their normal thought. You ask, well, where does something like that come from? It doesn't come from the person because they're horrified by it.
I mean, I can have a day where I have bad thoughts and then I feel drained at the end of it. I'm going, oh my goodness, not again. I have to be careful.
Yeah, you have to watch. So they energetically drain their victim. So if you had a big leech on your arm, what would you do?
What would you do?
Pull it off. You don't just sit there and watch it.
So this is what you do in your practice now. I'm looking to kind of tie this all together for our viewers in a way.
Well, yeah, they have to know this stuff.
So you had, your experiences when you were a younger man, you had the trauma in your personal life, that kind of led you into the work that you've done, and you've gone through hospitals and psych crisis and prisons and psych wards, and you found that they weren't helping. They were more hindering with the drugs, we'll say, and not looking to cure anybody, but kind of maintain them in their nuttiness, for
right. And tell them their brains were broken because of some chemical brain imbalance that they'd never had any proof for. This was made up by one of the pharmaceutical companies when they came out with Prozac. They went, oh, well, it's a drug, so it's a physical drug, so it must affect the physical thing. So we'll just say this and put it out there to explain why our drugs work. It was a bunch of bull crap. They knew it at the time, and they went with it anyway.
Of course.
So then with all the millions of dollars they're making on selling this toxic horse crap that they're selling these people, they have all this advertisement. You open up the magazines and you say, oh yeah, Thorazine, miracle drug, and it does, it calms them down. The only reason those things work is because they calm them down. The voices need to have them ramped up. They need to have them paranoid in order to control them and to feed off them. These drugs are major tranquilizers. They dumb them down. They can't even see straight. A lot of them in the state hospital are drooling. It's like, and what was interesting is the psychiatrist will say, oh yeah, the voices are hallucinations. They're hallucinating, until they find out that the voices are telling these patients to kill themselves. Once they find that out, oh, there's not hallucinations anymore. We got to act. We got to take them, put them on suicide watch, real to lock them up, increase his meds. all of a sudden they became very real,
Mm.
because they don't want this guy killing themselves on their watch. And the suicide rate of schizophrenics is 3 to 5 times that above the normal population. But so is the suicide rate for psychiatrists.
Of course. And
Yeah.
even they don't know what a schizophrenic is, according to what you've said about the way
No,
that
they have no idea. They have
so
no idea.
so how do they know it's 3 to 5 times higher? Like who is making these statistics if they're not
Oh,
sure?
they're out there. I looked them up. I mean, I could look them up for you. I got them somewhere here. But yeah, it's like Institute of NICH or the National Institute of Mental Health. They publish that kind of stuff. You can even punch it into Google. Suicide rate of psychiatrists compared to other doctors. It'll come up.
Or depressed people, right? They say kill themselves at a higher rate. I mean, that happens a lot in Japan,
Well,
and that could just be schizophrenics
well,
so-called
you
misdiagnosed.
look at what they're hearing. You
Right.
look at what depressed people are hearing. Oh, it's hopeless. It's no good. And that's what psychiatrists are telling patients. Oh, there is no cure. It's
Mm.
hopeless. The only thing you could do is take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life until we rot out your brain for you.
So how do you tie this all into your current practice?
Oh, that's another story. Okay. First of all, you got to educate them about what's going on, what the voices are, why the medications work, all that kind of stuff. Now, I was able to get a number of cures based on what I knew prior to running into this other method here. But it took longer.
Mm.
So here I am. I get all these messages all the time from all kinds of different people. Some of them are pretty screwy stuff, and I try to answer the ones that are kind of rational as best I can. But here's this one guy writes me and he goes, "I got somebody you need to meet. At worst, she would be like a happy grandmother." And he leaves it at that, And I didn't know this guy from Adam. And I said, "Well, that's interesting. He's not asking to talk to me. He's asking me I have to meet this old lady,
Okay.
And I went, well, I ought to answer that one. This one's it doesn't fit the regular pattern, So he puts me in contact with this gal, and it turns out that she is a Mace energy practitioner. And what had happened was this genius of a ship captain. This guy was he drove these big ships back and forth across the ocean all the time. He was a harbor pilot later on, but he didn't have any psychological training. He didn't have any psychiatric training. He didn't have his head polluted by the establishment as I did, and I had to break through all this stuff. He had a fresh start. So here he was trying to piece together what was happening with the human mind.
Mm.
And after talking to her, I found that what she had to say very interesting. And there were 2 books that this guy wrote. It was called Energy Over Mind and Causism by John Mace. And I got those 2 books. And what this guy did, which is something that psychiatry and psychology are badly missing, is there was a spiritual component to what he was doing. So you had the spirit, you had the ego, you had the body, and then you had the mind. Now he said the mind wasn't what we consider the mind. What we consider the mind now. He said what the mind does is it takes pictures of where you put your attention. Okay? And that's all it does. It has no reasoning ability. It has no logical anything. It's a stimulus response thing. What's attributed normally to the mind is actually the province of the spirit, the energetic being inside of us. So without your spirit, you'd be dead. We are energetic beings. We are spiritual beings. That's ignored by psychology and psychiatry. Totally ignored. They're treating us like we're physical machines, and we're not. If your spirit leaves you, you're dead as a doornail. You're gone. You start rotting. And you don't have a battery pack on your back either. your energy comes from inside, so you're an energetic being. Your energy comes from inside, so what he found after this was his 40 years of experimenting. So it was like he was doing the same thing I was doing in a different province, and I talked to this gal. Her name was Sherry Hatfield. She was a jolly old one. She was just delightful to talk to, and we were going back and forth, and I guess I reminded her of John Mace in what I was doing, and so she started teaching me about this stuff, and I started reading about it. And what Mace found is that what you resist persists. So when you have a trauma, and that's what causes schizophrenia. I mean, it's these traumas. You talk to any schizophrenic and they'll say, yeah, this bad thing happened to me, and I was sexually molested, and I was badly beaten, and I was tortured, and
Sure.
it's all trauma based. Some of it is drugs. I mean, meth and some of the other drugs will bring it on, especially meth. Meth will open people up, and I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on meth than any other drug. I mean, it just opens you up to these things and gets in. But what John Mace found is that it takes a lot of energy to keep that stuff, those traumas buried, and they're buried alive. So they're like landmines. So when somebody comes around who has those traits that you buried and you don't want to deal with, and sets them off, and what this would be like the person you hate, no matter where you go, there's a person like that comes around and starts irritating you. You can go from Japan to US, and there's always somebody like that who comes up and goes, oh, it's that kind of jerk again. Here he comes.
All the time.
Yeah. So that's due to a negative identity that was buried that those people trigger. And
Right.
the ego takes care of it by going, well, get away from him, or attack him, or do something to get him away from you so you don't feel those bad feelings.
Right.
So these bad feelings are like a landmine. They're buried alive in there. And the trick Mace struggled with for years is how to identify where they are and how to discharge them so they are neutralized. And once they're neutralized, that negative identity is no longer there. And if you look at the definition of negative identity, it's something bad about yourself that was created during a trauma and it was then buried. Okay. And the more negative identities you have, the more out of control you are, and the more miserable you are, the more psychotic you are, the more depressed you are. So Mace found that if you could find out where these things were buried, get in there and direct the patient's attention at them in a specific way, you could actually dissolve the charge of those negative identities, and that trauma-based negative identity vanishes. They can still remember it, but there's no emotional charge to it anymore. It's like, oh, this bad thing happened. And it's so quick. It's incredible. I've never seen anything work like it ever. That's 4 years in undergraduate psychology, 2 years in master's degree, 40 years on the front lines, and 2 years in a PhD program. They don't have anything that can touch this. Nothing.
So they kind of face their trauma with honesty, you mean? Kind of look at it?
They have to look at it,
Right.
and they have to look at it in a specific way under certain conditions.
Right.
And it dissolves. And after they're done, it may take an hour, maybe a little more, and boom, they feel the difference right away. And that one is gone. There's nothing else out there like it. So what the Mace Institute did is they took this to one of the universities in Australia. So John Mace was an Australian. And they took it to one of the universities. He said, look at this. We'll show it to you. Here, we'll give you a free session. Why don't you think about teaching this instead of the garbage you're teaching?
No.
And no, they said, we want to own it. We want the patent to it. Otherwise, we're not going to mess with it. Mace was thinking about energy, since we are energetic beings.
Right.
And he's going, well, you look at magnetism. It's a pure form of energy. Now, there's no pollution to magnetism. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it, you can't smell it. You don't know it would exist if you didn't have some iron filings or a magnet or a piece of iron or something like that. You can't see that magnetic field. You can't sense it. You get a jar full of iron filings and you put a big magnet next to it, then the energetic field appears. The only way you can see is you can't see energy. You can't see electricity. You can't see gravity. You can't see, ultraviolet light, and none of that. It's not. It's not amenable to our senses most of the time. You can't see X-rays. That kind of stuff. But it's he sees that the magnetic field is pure energy. Electricity is pure energy. There's no such thing as polluted energy. And he reasons that if all these other forms of energy are pure, gravity, electricity, magnetic fields, all these other forms of energy, then the human spirit is also energy and it's also pure. And what happens is because of the traumas, your ego gets all messed up, and it's not that your spirit is not pure. Your ego gets all screwed up, and it affects you by the way the energy flows in warped ways. And if you could remove those blockages, then you'd level out. So what he found, what happens with electricity is it flows from negative to positive. And what happens with human beings is that the energy also flows from negative to positive. So the spirit will absorb those negative traumas if you set it up right. And it takes a little while, but boom, once it's gone, it's gone.
Right.
And the person feels so much better afterward, and it's very quick. And with schizophrenics, they have massive amounts of these negative identities, due to trauma.
So this is what your current practice is
Yes.
based around. Okay.
Well, it's a mixture of both these,
Right.
so nobody's ever used this stuff with schizophrenics before. So I've had 2 fully recover right now, and I've had several in the prison recover without the mace energy stuff. So, the crap that psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia are saying about, this is a death sentence. There's nothing that could be done about this. Your situation is hopeless. All you can do is take our toxic meds. It's bullcrap. It's raw garbage. If a handful of them can recover, the rest of them can too. Now, some of them are so far gone, I can't reach them. Given that, I mean, there's some that I've dealt with that I can't reach. They're just too far gone. But for light cases, moderate cases, there's hope. It can be done, and we've been doing it. And even if they don't fully recover, they're much better, and they have the tools to fight back.
It's amazing to watch and to see a full circle on your life here. Actually, you just give me like I've talked with you. I've talked with you a few times, and I've been always curious about all the questions I asked in this conversation to see, like, how did Jerry become the man he became? Like, where did he begin? And because you've told some very interesting stories. This is, as I mentioned, our 4th chat. And now it seems to me for our viewers, we get to tie it all together to see your journey, like how you got to where you are, and why you're doing what you're doing. And still, I guess, beyond what they would say normal retirement years for those of us that have a mission in life, we never retire. And
that's kind of what it comes down to. It's like, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? If I don't put out and the truth is the truth. I mean, the voices are energetic entities. That's all there is to it. They can scream and holler and raise crap all they want, but the truth is the truth. I mean, these things are entities. They are not hallucinations. Until they realize that, there's nothing they're going to be able to do. And what they're doing is like, pouring Thorazine on top of a magnetic field and gumming up the magnet and going, oh yeah, the magnet's gummed up, so the magnetic field isn't quite as strong because we got a pint of Thorazine on top of it. They are not physical. There's no time. There's no space where they're at. They can be in two places at the same time. They can go into your mind. They can pull up every rotten thing you've ever done and rub it in your face until they generate that negative emotional energy that they feed off of. They want you to believe that those negative thoughts belong to you. They don't want you to realize that those thoughts are coming in from somewhere else. They're not yours. Because if they can trick you into believing that every thought in your head belongs to you, they got you. You start beating on yourself. You turn on yourself. That's what they want.
100%. I would agree with you on just about all of that. And I've had my own experiences, from the negative entities, my own beating up of myself, some of my self-medications in the process in my younger days when I've tried to, gum up my own magnetic field, let's say, whether it's with
everybody hears them to certain degrees. Like I said, every negative thought about yourself or anybody else comes from them. Those aren't your thoughts. The pure being that you are doesn't have those kind of thoughts. These are coming in from somewhere else. People need to realize not all their thoughts belong to them.
I hear you. And then we're being milked, which is also something.
Then we're being milked,
which is also something most people won't admit or don't want to admit.
Well, all they have to do is just pay a little bit of attention when something bad happens and you start remunerating over it, beating yourself over the head. How do you feel? Awful. Your energy goes down the tubes. You're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. What a stupid fool I am.
For sure.
That's not you thinking that stuff.
I would agree. Well, Jerry, I think maybe we've come full circle in this lovely chat. And, in an interesting way, like, we've brought people to what has been proposed as solutions, which are not real. We've had some of the circumstances, hospital psych wards, and some of the experiences you've had dealing with these people. You've mentioned in past chats having some physical interactions with these entities, which has been interesting, actually seeing them manifest into this world. And you talked about
there's a couple of times I've been scared shitless, I'll tell you that.
Right.
It's like it's a different reality. It's a very ugly one, but it is a different reality. It's a very low frequency reality.
Well, how do you feel on a daily basis working with these now? Like I said, if not you,
well,
who?
It does take a lot of, it does take my energy. I didn't, when I was working in the prison, I'd come home. If I dealt with more than two of them, I'd come back drained. I mean, I didn't have any energy to do anything around the house. I was drained. So I tried to keep it to one a day.
How about now when you're working with patients?
Now I've had so many requests that I'm taking on two a day, and that's all I can deal with. That's it. That's all I can deal with. And I'm scheduled all the way through next month and halfway through the next month beyond that. Trying to get out to help these people.
Well, is there anything you could leave our viewers, let's say, that are watching you now? Maybe they're in a position where they'd like some help or they're ready to ask for some help. They can see that you're booked for a long time. And if they're sitting with themselves in a room right now, what might you suggest to help them alleviate some of the challenges we've chatted about? I don't want to put you on the spot here while they're waiting.
No problem. They can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. It's MARZINSKY. And there's on the blog and under the articles, we got a lot of information, including the That's a Lie program, which is one of the most powerful programs that we put out that's free. And if they will start using that against the voices consistently, there will be improvement. The voices don't like it. They don't like any of that stuff. They don't like me. They called me a cunt the other day. That was interesting. I said, that's the first time I've been called that. They came out of one patient go, yeah, you're a cunt. I'm a what?
I've heard all kinds of things, maybe not out loud. I think I've been called worse in my head anyways, but and I've talked with Sherry, and I can say that That's a Lie program, Sherry Sweeney. Her and I have chatted, and we're email pals, and we talk all the time. So it's definitely a program worth looking into. I can highly recommend it.
Sherry came up with it. That's what she cured herself with. So it's powerful enough if you use it consistently, to provide some real help. And then we have these characteristics on there. We've got blog articles. We've got all kinds of other articles on. There's a lot of information that they need to know that they can get from that website. There's a place where they can sign up for a session
to
get on the schedule there.
Okay.
And don't forget to put all your information on there, because I always forget to.
No worries. So I will leave Jerry's links below so you can reach out to him. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to comment and or send him or myself an email. Jerry and I are going to continue our conversation. We've had some plans to move along, maybe to have Mind Monsters 5 and have some other guests along. And at some point, we might even get into some of those cases that I see sitting behind Jerry that I've been dying to ask him about, especially that yellow binder that's sticking out right there, just to see what that one is.
Let me see what that one reads. It says, interesting cases at the prison. That's what.
There you go. Ah, okay. Hold
so
on.
You picked it right out. The whole binder is full of them.
Interesting cases at the prison. Okay, I'm gonna call you on that one. And I don't like to use the word promise, but I'm going to call you out on that one. And maybe one day we'll pull out that yellow one. We'll have a chat called Interesting Cases at the Prison. I would love to have.
I don't think it's going anywhere.
Oh, good. I would love to have that chat. And don't forget, so check out Sherry Sweeney, her That's a Lie program. Check out what Jerry says.
Yeah. The other thing is they can read this book.
All right.
I mean, this talks about the voices and how we came to the conclusion that they are entities and not hallucinations. And you can get this from lulu.com, or you can get it off of Amazon. It's got a 4.7 rating, which is surprised me. And last I checked, there's like 140, 150 people with a 4.7 rating. So that's pretty good. It took us 2 years. Sherry and I put it together, and it was a lot of work, for the size of it. But yeah, anybody who is hearing voices or has somebody who is hearing voices needs to read that, because you're not going to get it from the psychiatric mafia. You're not going to get it from the educational institutions. You're not going to get it anywhere, and the truth is the truth. No matter what they say, these voices are entities. They are parasitic, and that's not going to change. They can say whatever they want. They can put out whatever lies they want. They can cover it over with it's eventually going to come out.
I hear you. And I agree. And so I'm going to leave our viewers with this. If you need help, there's nothing but help up there. If you want, you can. And basically what that really comes down to is you're not alone. There's always ways to help yourself. You're not at the mercy of the drugs or any of those other things. And if you feel like you need some help and you want to move along, feel free to let us know. I'm happy to point it along. I'm happy to share with Jerry. There's all kinds of good information out there. Jerry's mentioned a whole bunch of ones in this conversation. And
we got a hearing voices group.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think they can sign up for it from the website. I mean, there's almost 1,000 people on it right now. So here's schizophrenics talking to each other about their voices, where they never had a voice before, because psychiatry and the doctors would go, "Oh yeah, you're just crazy. That's all there is to it. Take these meds and shut up." So here they are talking to one another. It's a good place for somebody to do some research if they can get in there. And there's also a Mothers of Schizophrenics group that Janine, who we talked about bringing on, she might be free in another month.
Okay.
To bring her on. I think you can sign up for that there too. I'm not sure.
Well, I would love to.
There's a lot of information there that people who are hearing voices or have somebody who's hearing voices needs to read.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to leave it there then. If there's help, if you need it, it's out there. Do some work. Pick up, a phone, or look underneath this video or any videos that Jerry's done. There's a whole bunch on his website as well. I'll also leave a link there. And we hope to see you again very soon. And we hope you're doing better. Jerry, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it was great. I appreciate it. Looking forward to the next one. All of you, I love you all very much. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again soon.
Adios.
Can't make me lie to my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Free to bust is what I say.